All right. So here's number 10. So basically, yeah, we have these differentiable functions, which means basically we just find the derivatives of them, right? And then we're given this table of values of functions and the derivatives, right? So we're given when x equals 1 through 6, we're given f of those numbers, and we're given f prime of those numbers. The same thing with g of those numbers and g prime of those numbers, right? All right. So anyway, the key with this, just like on the last problem, is find the derivative first, right? So don't plug in values until you find the derivative. So ignore these, ignore this whole table for a second, okay? And just find the derivative. All right, so let's do part 1 first. So for part 1, this little 1 right here just doesn't mean anything. It just means, it just differentiates between these two values, right? This is the first h function, this is the second h function, right? That's all that's saying. So h of x is f of x quantity squared, right? So the first thing I'm going to do, if I'm going to find h primed at 5, I first need to find h primed of x. So h primed, little h1 primed of x is going to be chain rule, right? I have an outer function and an inner function. So I'm going to take the derivative of the outer function, which is 2 times f of x, right, to the first power, right? So we could put that 1 there. But since it's a 1, we actually don't need it, nor do we need those extra parentheses anymore, okay? So that's the derivative of the outer function, right? Now I'm going to take the derivative of the inner function, which is f of x. So the derivative of f of x is just f primed of x, okay? So don't overthink it. The derivative of f of x is f primed of x. So you just write it like that, okay? So now we have this derivative function, and now we can input the 5 in for x, okay? So don't get ahead of yourself. Make sure you find the derivative first, then input the 5. So we get 2 times f of 5 times f primed of 5, right? Okay, and now, finally, now you can use this table, right? So now we can look for f of 5. So here's f of x, and here's 5, right? So f of 5 is going to be 5, it turns out. And that's just coincidental, right? It doesn't always end up being that way. But in this case, it ended up being 5. Okay, and then f primed of 5, so f primed of 5 is going to be negative 1. So I'll just put a negative 1 in here. All right, and then we just multiply those together. So 2 times 5 times negative 1 is negative 10. So that's our answer for h primed of 5, right? Okay, and let me label that here too, because this is a little different than this is the general function, and then here I'm inputting 5, right? So those are not exactly the same. All right, now part 2, I have this new h function, right? h2 of x, right? So I'm going to find the derivative of that first. And if you notice, this is actually just the chain rule itself, right? Like this is, what do we do if we have a function within a function, we take the derivative, right? Well, it's chain rule. So we take the derivative of the outer function first, right? Keep the inner function the same. And then we multiply by the derivative of the inner function. So the derivative of g of x is g primed of x. All right, so it's just the chain rule formula itself, basically, right? Not basically, it really is. All right, so now I'm going to input 3, right? So now we have this new input variable 3, and I'm going to put that in wherever there's an x. Okay, so here's where I've seen a lot of people make mistakes. A lot of people find f primed at 3 and put it in. Don't do that, because we're not finding f primed of 3. We're finding f primed of g of x, right? Of g of 3 in this case. So it's going to be f primed of g of 3 times g primed at 3, right? Okay, so now we can find g. I'll do it like this. Find g of 3 first. So here's g, and here's 3, so that's going to be 2. So it'll be f primed at 2, right? Okay, times, g primed at 3, where we can find that. So g primed at 3 is going to be g primed and 3. So that'll be negative 3 over 2. Okay, so notice now, remember, it's tempting to want to do f primed at 3, but we're actually finding f primed at 2, right? And so make sure you always do this first, because you oftentimes end up with something different than that input that you are putting in. So here, f primed at 2, so now I have to look at this column here, find f, or this row, excuse me. F primed at 2 turns out to be 1, so this is going to equal 1 times negative 3 over 2, which equals negative 3 over 2, right? So that's our final answer there, and that's h sub 2 primed at 3. All right, so that's how we do those ones. So basically find the derivative first, then input the values, and then take it step by step, right? So once you input the values, kind of work inside out, especially with this situation here, okay? All right, let me know if you have any questions on that one.